I worked as a seasonal park ranger in the summer of 1995 at Black Willow Forest Preserve in the upper Midwest. It was a flat spread of hardwoods and marsh stitched together by gravel service roads and picnic loops. Families filled it during the day. At night it went quiet in a way that felt pressed down, like the air had weight. Our job after sunset was routine. A rotating patrol checked picnic areas, boat launches, and trailheads after closing. We logged damage, locked restrooms, and cleared stragglers. We worked in pairs or threes, moving on a loose schedule, so no one could predict where we would be at any exact minute. At least that was the idea. The first odd thing was trash. We expected messes. Beer cans crushed into grass. Diapers shoved under tables. What we found instead was neat. Bags tied and stacked beside bins. Loose wrappers gathered into piles. Coolers left behind with the lids open, ice melted, food gone. Nothing scattered. Nothing ripped. No drag marks. No footprints that made sense. The ground under the tables was often bare dirt from years of use, easy to read, and there was nothing there that pointed to an animal. Raccoons left chaos. Coyotes left torn foam and tracks. This was different. Clean. Careful. We wrote it up as courtesy use at first. Maybe a group cleaned up after another group. The coolers bothered us, but people forget things. Then the pattern repeated. Same loops. Same style. Food gone. Gear left. It happened across weeks. We rotated routes, but the results stayed consistent. The preserve closed at dusk, yet the signs were fresh. Cold ash in grills. Condensation still clinging to plastic. It meant someone was there after dark. We added extra passes. We staggered times. That was when the lighting started to behave strangely. The shelters had timers on their lights. They were old, but they worked. We would roll into a lot and see the lights cut off just before we rounded the bend. It happened twice in 1 week. We told ourselves it was coincidence. Then motion sensors tripped in empty lots minutes after we left. The alarms were local. They did not call anyone. They just logged events. The logs showed the same thing. A trigger shortly after our departure. The time stamps lined up too well. We stopped laughing about it. We began to log exact times. We began to switch drivers. We varied speeds. Still, the timing matched us. It felt like being watched without seeing anyone. There were no silhouettes, no sounds that carried, only the sense that someone knew where we were. One night in late July, we parked near the South Picnic Loop to eat and finish reports. The air was thick and still. Mosquitoes buzzed the windows. The engine was off. The dash clock glowed dim red. We sat there longer than usual, because the place felt wrong and leaving felt worse. That was when something heavy walked around the truck. I did not hear it at first. I felt it. A slow shift through the suspension, a gentle rock as weight moved near the rear tire. Then a measured step. Gravel pressed down and released. The sound was deliberate, not hurried, not sloppy. The steps circled the vehicle. They stopped at the rear door, then moved to the side door, then to the front. At each stop there was a pause, long enough to imagine a hand on the handle. The truck did not shake. Whoever it was did not touch it. They just stood close, breathing slow enough that I could not hear it over the insects. I stared at the windshield and kept my hands still. The cab smelled like warm plastic and coffee. The radio was silent. The steps resumed, one after another, until they faded into grass. We waited. Nothing else happened. No light flicked on. No branch snapped. When we finally drove off, the tires crunched louder than they ever had. After that, we checked in more often. We carried heavier lights. We parked with our backs to open ground. The pattern continued. Lights went dark just before arrival. Sensors tripped after departure. Trash stacked. Food gone. No tracks. We never saw anyone. Not once. We found one new thing, though. Small marks near the service road that were not tire tracks. Indentations spaced evenly, deeper than a boot heel, with clean edges. The soil there was clay. It holds shape. The marks suggested someone who knew how to place weight and lift cleanly. One ranger quit without notice in early August. He had been solid. No complaints. He turned in his keys and left town. The explanation came later through a supervisor who looked shaken. The ranger said something had started waiting outside his house. Not every night. Often enough to be certain. He never saw it clearly. He would wake and notice the yard light was off, even when he had left it on. In the morning there were signs of standing near his windows. Flattened grass. No prints. He said the timing was exact. The nights he worked late, the yard was empty. The nights he came home early, the signs were there. He believed it had followed him from the preserve. That ended it for us. The patrols changed. Law enforcement took over after dark. We stopped writing courtesy notes. We stopped lingering. Within a week the activity ceased. No more stacked trash. No more empty coolers. The sensors went quiet. The lights behaved. Summer ended. I finished the season and moved on. Years later I learned what likely happened. A former maintenance worker had been let go the previous year. He knew the preserve like a map. He could walk blind. He knew the timers, the sensors, the patrol habits. He had access to a radio scanner and used it to track our movements. He lived out of his truck on and off, moving between county lands. He took food because it was easy. He stacked trash because he did not want attention. He avoided leaving prints because he knew where the soil would hold them. He circled our truck to see if anyone was inside and alert, checking doors without touching. He learned schedules because learning them was his skill. When one ranger became predictable, the attention shifted off the preserve and onto a house. That was enough to stop him. He was arrested months later for trespass and stalking in a different county. No violence, no weapons, just patience and knowledge used the wrong way. I still think about the weight on the gravel and the pauses at each door. The sense of being measured. It was not a monster. It was a person who paid attention, who understood routine, and who used that understanding to move unseen. That is what made it frightening. It was ordinary, practiced, and close. I was a seasonal ranger at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in May of 2003. I was young enough to believe the uniform made me competent and stupid enough to believe the desert followed rules. My friend and I had the same hire date and the same narrow bunk room with cinder block walls that held heat all night. We were assigned together because neither of us had enough experience to be trusted alone. Our task list that week was simple. Walk washes and hills, find small caves that people crawled into, and mark the ones that were unsafe. Most of them were shallow. Most were already ruined. We logged them, took photos, tied flagging, and moved on. The desert taught patterns fast. Caves near roads had trash. Spray paint on the first 10 feet. Beer cans pushed into cracks. Old campfire soot. The smell of urine. Even the deeper ones carried signs of people. Footprints and dust. Scratches where knees dragged. Bat guano where bats still lived. Sound too. Wings. Chirps. A faint ammonia smell. If a cave was empty of people, something else usually claimed it. The cave we found sat in a low limestone hill north of the main road, off a faint game trail that cut through creosote and broken rock. The map listed it as a shallow solution cavity with a mapped length under 40 feet. The entrance was wide enough to walk into without ducking. From the outside it looked ordinary. Pale stone, a clean lip, sand gathered like a tide line at the mouth. What stopped us was the absence of everything else. No trash. No paint. No soot. No smell. Even the sand looked untouched, smooth as if wind had combed it. I knelt and ran a hand across it. It held shape, then relaxed back, fine and dry. No footprints crossed it. Not even animal tracks. We noted it, shrugged, and turned on our headlamps. The air changed at the threshold. Outside the heat pressed down like a hand on the neck. Inside felt cooler, but not in a clean way. It felt thick. Each breath met resistance, like breathing through fabric pulled tight. I took a deeper breath to test it, and felt a dull pressure in my chest that I could not place. The walls were pale and smooth, almost polished by time. The floor sloped down gently. Our lamps cast tight cones that swallowed detail beyond a few yards. Sound behaved wrong. Our steps sounded close, then far, then close again. There was no drip, no flutter, no scurry. The cave was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. We moved slowly, counting steps without saying numbers. At about 50 feet in, I noticed my lamp was not as bright. The beam looked tired. I tapped it and checked the strap. At the same moment my friend tilted his head and adjusted his own light. The dimming matched. Not flicker. Not failure. A steady loss, like both lamps were breathing out together. I checked my watch. It still ticked. I checked the spare batteries in my pocket by feel. They were warm from my body. We had put fresh batteries in that morning, because the heat drained them fast. There was no reason for them to drop at the same rate at the same time. The map said 40 feet. We had gone past that. The passage narrowed, but did not end. The walls pressed closer. The ceiling lowered. The floor stayed smooth. I felt the weight in the air deepen. My breaths grew louder in my head. Then I noticed another rhythm that did not match either of us. It was slow, even, patient. At first I thought it was my own breathing echoing back, delayed by the shape of the cave. I slowed my breath. The sound did not change. I held my breath. The sound continued. It came from deeper in, beyond where the light reached. It was not loud. It did not rush. It waited. I felt a wave of heat break across my face, then cold. My mouth tasted like metal. My headlamp dimmed another step. My friend shifted his weight, and the sound of his boot on stone was swallowed. We did not need words. We both turned at the same time. Backing out took effort. Each step felt wrong, like walking against a current. The slope that had been gentle going in felt steeper going out. My chest burned. The air felt heavier with each step. The breathing stayed behind us, unchanged, as if distance did not matter. Halfway back, I glanced down to check my footing and saw the sand behind us. Our boot prints were gone. Not softened, not blurred by drift. Filled in completely, smooth as the sand at the entrance. The edges were brushed clean, like someone had passed a hand over them. We moved faster. The lamps continued to dim together. The mouth of the cave looked farther away than it should have been. The light outside looked harsh and unreal, a white sheet. As we crossed the threshold, the air released us. Heat slammed back. Sound returned. Wind hissed through the creosote. I sucked air until my chest hurt and leaned forward with my hands on my knees. My friend did the same. We did not look at each other right away. We checked our lamps. Both were nearly dead. When we stepped a few feet from the entrance, they flickered and went out within seconds of each other. We stood there until our hands stopped shaking. We went back to the truck without marking the cave. That was against procedure. We told ourselves we would return with better gear. We did not. Back at the station, we wrote the report. We stuck to facts. Clean cave. Air quality concerns. Mapped length likely incorrect. Equipment failure. Recommended closure pending evaluation. We flagged it as a potential low oxygen environment. That was the closest safe language we had. A week later, a senior ranger and a geologist went out with proper meters and ropes. They stayed less than 10 minutes. The report came back dry and final. The cave extended into a deeper chamber connected to a fissure system that trapped heavier gases. Carbon dioxide pooled there, odorless and invisible, displacing oxygen. The breathing we heard was likely wind moving through narrow stone, amplified by low oxygen effects on perception. The lamps dimmed because battery chemistry failed faster in cooler air and under low oxygen draw. The prints vanished because fine sand at the angle of the slope sloughed back when disturbed, then settled smooth. The explanation fit. It closed every door that fear had opened. The cave was sealed with a steel grate bolted into the rock. Warning signs went up. The map was updated. No one argued. I never went back. My friend transferred the next season. I stayed one more year, then left the service. Even now, when I think about that place, what stays with me is not the sound or the dark. It is the cleanliness. The way the desert, which always shows its scars, had kept that space untouched. The way danger did not announce itself with smell or noise. It waited, patient, doing nothing at all. I trust the report. I believe the explanation. The desert does not need anything else to be dangerous. It only needs time and a lack of air. February 2010 sits in my body the way old injuries do. Quiet until something cold presses against it, then everything comes back sharp. I was a park ranger in a northern Canadian reserve that most maps barely bothered to label. Endless spruce, frozen lakes hidden under wind-packed snow, roads that vanished after the first storm of the season. Winter patrols were routine. Dangerous, but routine. You learned to read weather and terrain the same way you read people. Or at least you thought you did. My partner had transferred in late January from another province. No name I ever used out loud here, because it feels wrong to attach one. He was older than me by maybe 10 years. Lean. Efficient. He had the calm of someone who had already seen how bad things could get and adjusted his expectations. He spoke only when it mattered. He checked gear twice without comment. He never complained about cold. The forecast that morning was bad and getting worse. Visibility warnings. Wind climbing fast. We still went out because there was a report of an abandoned vehicle near a seasonal access road. Standard procedure. We packed extra fuel, blankets, food, flares. The kind of preparation that makes you feel responsible, not safe. The blizzard caught us earlier than predicted. Snow moved sideways. The world narrowed to the shape of the windshield and the white churn beyond it. The radio crackled but stayed usable. We slowed down, scanning for anything out of place. That was when we saw him. A man standing off the road, half buried in snow miles from the nearest pullout. No vehicle tracks. No snowmobile trail. No footprints leading to where he stood. Just a single figure facing the treeline. He was not dressed for winter. No parka. No gloves. A thin jacket open at the chest. Jeans stiff with ice. Boots meant for fall at best. Every training scenario I had ever run through my head lit up at once. We stopped. Wind rocked the truck. Snow hammered the doors. I expected him to collapse when we stepped out. People in that condition usually did. Hypothermia stole strength fast. He did not move. Up close, he looked wrong in a way that took me a second to name. His skin was red, not pale or blue. Not the patchy gray you see near the end. Red like he had been scrubbed raw. His eyes were open too wide. Not glassy. Focused on something deep in the trees behind us. He did not shiver. We followed procedure. Assess, stabilize, get him into warmth. I moved to grab a blanket. My partner stepped toward him first, slow and careful, boots crunching in the snow. The man leaned forward. I could not hear what he said over the wind. I could barely hear my own breathing. I saw my partner tilt his head slightly, like he was listening to a radio transmission. The man was close enough now that their foreheads nearly touched. My partner froze. The change was immediate and complete. His shoulders dropped. His hands went slack at his sides. The alert focus I had seen every day since he arrived drained away. His face went empty, like a room after furniture has been removed. He turned toward me and made a single clear gesture toward the truck, and then the road back the way we came. He did not look at the man again. Training screamed at me. You do not leave your partner. You do not leave a civilian. You do not abandon a scene in a storm. None of that mattered against the expression on his face. It was not fear. It was certainty. I backed away. Snow filled my boots. My hands shook as I climbed into the driver's seat. I watched them through the windshield as I started the engine. My partner stepped closer to the man. The man turned slightly, angling his body toward the forest. I drove. Every meter away felt wrong. The storm closed in fast. The road disappeared behind me. I kept expecting to hear the radio. It stayed silent. I told myself my partner was experienced. I told myself he had a plan. I told myself that getting help was the right call. It took hours to reach the station. By the time I got back out with another crew, the blizzard had burned itself down to heavy snow and wind. The temperature had dropped even further. We found the truck where we left it. Snow drifted up against the doors. No sign of a struggle. No sign of urgency. Just absence. 3 sets of footprints led away from the road. They were clear enough to read. My partner's boots. The man's worn soles. And a third set that should not have been there. The third prints were from standard issue Ranger boots. Mine. They veered into the trees together. We followed until the forest swallowed them. Snow thickened under the canopy. Wind died down. Sound disappeared. The prints stayed visible for longer than they should have. They did not stagger. They did not loop. They moved with purpose. We found my partner's hat first. Then one glove. Then nothing else. The search lasted days. Helicopters when weather allowed. Ground teams rotating in shifts. Dogs lost the scent almost immediately. The cold preserved tracks in some places and erased them in others. The trail ended at a frozen creek where ice had drifted over itself in uneven slabs. No breakthrough. No blood. No sign of a fall. The official report said exposure. It said disorientation. It said the man was likely suffering from paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing behaviors associated with advanced hypothermia. It said my partner followed him in an attempt to render aid and became a second victim. The third set of prints was attributed to overlapping tracks and poor visibility. I signed the report. I know what I saw. Weeks later, inventory turned up something that did not belong to either of them. A Ranger jacket from a unit 3 provinces away, buried under fresh snow less than a kilometer from the creek. It was old issue. No name tag. No record of it missing. The pockets were empty except for a single road map, folded until it was soft, with no markings on it at all. The explanation that settled in my mind was not dramatic. It was worse. The man knew the land better than we did. He knew where storms cut visibility. He knew how long a person could stand still and cold before their body shut down. He knew how to get close enough to be heard and say exactly what would break someone open. I believe he told my partner something true. Something specific. Something that removed choice. My partner was not the first to follow him. The jacket was proof enough of that. We never learned the man's name because he did not want us to. People like that survive by moving through systems without leaving edges to grab. Remote parks are full of them. Drifters. Hunters. Men who fall out of records and learn how to stay gone. I stayed on duty another year. Every winter patrol after that felt thinner, like the margin for error had been shaved down without anyone telling me. I left when I caught myself scanning the trees for figures standing too still. I still replay the moment in my head, trying to hear what I could not hear then. I do not imagine threats or madness. I imagine something simple and factual, delivered without emotion, that turned duty into obedience. 3 sets of footprints went into that forest. None came out because only one of them had ever planned to leave. My name is Daniel R., and in late August of 2012 I was working as a seasonal park ranger in eastern Oregon's high desert. I took the job because I needed distance. My divorce had finalized that spring, and the house felt loud even when it was quiet. The desert promised space, long sightlines, fewer people. I asked for backcountry patrol because it meant days alone with checklists and radios and nothing personal to talk about. Part of my assignment involved radio checks on old fire lookouts. Most of them had been decommissioned years earlier, but they still appeared on maps and in the system. The official reason was redundancy. The real reason was that nobody ever bothered to clean them out of the database. Once a week an automated signal pinged each site. If the system got a response, even static, it logged it and moved on. One lookout had not responded in months. It sat on a basalt ridge about 11 miles from the nearest maintained road. The paperwork said the structure was closed in 1996. No assigned staff, no equipment. I was told the missing responses were likely due to weather damage or vandalism. I was asked to hike up, verify the condition, and report back. Solo. Standard issue. I parked before sunrise and started up while the ground was still cool. The trail was barely a trail, more a line of disturbed dust between sage and rock. The sun came up fast, bleaching the land pale. By mid-morning the heat pressed down hard, but what struck me most was the quiet. Late August usually meant insects, birds, some wind moving the grass. That day there was none of it. No sound except my boots and my breath. Even those felt too loud. As I climbed higher, the silence followed. No ravens. No grasshoppers. The air sat still. It felt wrong in a way I could not place at first. The desert usually carries sound far. That morning it felt padded, like cotton in the ears. The lookout came into view just after noon. A square wooden structure on stilts, gray with age, perched on bare rock. The ladder hung down. That was the first thing that stopped me. Standard procedure was to pull the ladder up when a lookout was unstaffed, both to keep animals out and to discourage hikers. This ladder was down, resting in the dust. The wood looked worn where hands had gripped it. I stood there longer than I should have, scanning the ridge. No vehicles. No smoke. No movement. I told myself someone could have climbed up years ago and left it that way. Gravity does not care about policy. I climbed. Inside, the air smelled wrong. Old wood, yes, but layered with something else. Sweat. Oil. Food. Not rot. Recent use has a different weight. The windows were dusty, but wiped clear in places where someone had leaned to look out. There were food wrappers on the floor near the cot. Candy bars I recognized from my childhood. Brands that had disappeared from shelves years earlier. The packaging was faded, but not brittle. The sleeping bag lay unrolled. It held heat. I noticed that right away. I also noticed the smell. Human. Unwashed but fresh. Someone had been there recently. The radio equipment sat on the desk. Old model. Analog. The power light was off. The antenna cable was intact. The logbook lay open beside it. I expected blank pages after the mid-90s. Instead, the book was full. Neat entries, one per day, written in pen. Dates that went on for years after the site was officially closed. Weather notes. Visibility. Fire reports. Routine language, nothing dramatic. The handwriting stayed consistent. Careful. Controlled. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. The pen stroke trailed off as if the writer had lifted it suddenly. I checked the corners. No one hiding. No signs of forced entry. Everything had been used with care. Cleaned. Maintained. Someone had lived there quietly for a long time. I tried to radio out. The unit crackled. A carrier wave caught. Then I heard my own voice come back through the speaker. Not an echo. Not delayed feedback. It repeated a phrase I had not spoken yet, word for word, in my voice, flat and steady. It came through before my mouth moved. I shut the radio off. For a few seconds the silence returned, heavier than before. My pulse hammered in my ears. I forced myself to breathe slow. Radios can do strange things. Old equipment, cross signals, feedback loops. There were explanations. None of them felt good. I did a full sweep of the structure again. Under the cot. Storage lockers. Nothing. I checked the trapdoor. Dust patterns showed repeated use. One set of boot prints. Same tread each time. A person who went up and down alone. I documented everything with my camera. The wrappers. The logbook. The ladder. The radio. Procedure anchored me. I kept my thoughts narrow and technical. Unauthorized occupancy. Long-term. Possibly transient. Possibly someone with former agency experience given the discipline in the logs. I descended and started back immediately. The silence stayed with me all the way down. No birds returned. No wind rose. My radio stayed clipped to my pack, powered off. By late afternoon the heat broke and sound returned in pieces. A distant bird call. Wind through grass. It felt like crossing a line. Back at the station I filed my report in full. Photos attached. I flagged it as priority. The response came the next morning. Law enforcement would handle it. I was told not to return. 2 weeks later I learned what they found. A man in his late 50s living off-grid, former contract lookout from the 80s. Records showed he had been let go after funding cuts. He never left. When the site closed, he stayed. Over time the automated pings became part of his routine. He had rewired the radio to receive them. He answered manually, logging his days like before. When the system upgraded, his responses stopped registering, but he kept transmitting. The radio issue had a cause. The old unit at the lookout had been modified to loop transmissions through a recording buffer. He recorded routine check phrases to replay later if he missed a ping. When I keyed the mic, the buffer dumped first. My voice came from a previous test transmission logged during an earlier maintenance check years before. Same phrase. Same cadence. I had planned to say it again out of habit. The man left the lookout the morning I arrived. He saw my truck from the ridge, packed what he could, and walked out into the desert. He was found days later, alive but dehydrated, sheltering in a culvert. He told officers he knew the schedule and knew when it was time to go. The logbook ended where it did because he heard my boots on the ladder. The lookout was dismantled that fall, removed completely. No marker left. The maps were updated. I finished the season and did not renew. Distance is not the same as peace. Sometimes it just makes the quiet louder. I transferred to the park in early April of 2016, a week after my mother's funeral. I told the supervisor it was for career reasons, a chance to work a larger section of the Appalachian Range, more responsibility, more autonomy. That was true in a narrow sense. The real reason was simpler. Being indoors felt unbearable. Walls pressed in on me. Silence felt loud. I needed open space and tasks that required focus. I volunteered for missing hiker follow-ups because they were quiet assignments. Most were old cases. Cold files meant to confirm that nothing new had surfaced. They rarely did. The work involved hiking known routes, checking old coordinates, and logging the same absence again. It felt useful without requiring emotional energy I did not have. One case stood out because it should have been simple. A man disappeared 5 years earlier less than a mile from a trailhead on a named spur that branched off the main Appalachian route. He was experienced, local. His car had been found where it should have been. There was no weather event that day. No injuries reported beforehand. He stepped off the trail for a bathroom break and never returned. Search teams covered the area thoroughly at the time. Dogs lost the scent near a small clearing. No remains. No gear beyond a single boot print photographed near the edge of the brush. I had read the file twice before heading out. I knew the tread pattern by memory. The boot was an older model, a common brand at the time, but the wear marks were distinctive. The outer heel was rounded down. A small tear in the sole created a repeated crescent shape in the mud. It was the kind of detail that stays clear in your mind once you have studied it long enough. The spur trail looked unchanged. Early spring meant thin leaves, wet ground, and clear sight lines through the trees. I walked slow. Not because I expected anything, but because moving slow had become my default. I logged fallen limbs, erosion points, and nothing else for the first half-mile. I saw the prints just before the clearing. They were not old. The edges were sharp. The soil still held moisture from rain the night before. The pattern was exact. Same wear. Same crescent tear. I stopped moving without realizing it. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up. I crouched and took photos from every angle. I measured stride length. It matched the archived notes. The direction made no sense. The prints came from the trail into the brush, then curved back out again, then turned toward the clearing. They did not wander. They moved with intent. I followed them because that was my job. Each step I took was deliberate. I watched the ground more than the trees. The clearing was small, ringed by young growth and low brush. The prints entered it, circled once, then doubled back in a tight loop. They stopped in the center of the open ground. There were no exit prints. I checked for disturbances. Broken grass. Scuffed soil. Nothing. The ground around the final print was undisturbed except for my own boots. I stood there longer than I should have. I told myself someone was playing a joke. Someone had found the case online. Someone owned the same boots. Someone wanted attention. None of those explanations fit cleanly, but I accepted them enough to keep working. I marked the location and decided to camp nearby to extend the survey into the next morning. Solo camping was allowed in that section for official duties. I pitched my tent at the edge of the trees, not in the clearing. I cooked a simple meal and wrote notes until dusk. Night settled without drama. The woods made the usual sounds. Wind in branches. Small animals moving through leaves. I lay awake longer than expected, listening without meaning to. Grief does that. It keeps you alert. The footsteps came after midnight. They were slow and measured. Not animal movement. Not random. Each step pressed down and lifted with weight behind it. They approached from the direction of the clearing. They stopped. I did not move. I counted breaths. I waited for another sound. None came. No retreat. No shift. Just the sense of presence at a fixed point. I stayed like that until my muscles ached. Eventually sleep took me in shallow stretches. In the morning, the clearing looked normal from a distance. When I stepped into it, I saw the disturbance immediately. The dirt in the center had been scraped away by hand. Letters formed with care. Straight lines. Even spacing. My name. It was spelled correctly. I documented everything. Photos. Measurements. I filled in the soil after. I packed up and returned to the station without taking breaks. I reported the incident as a possible trespasser. The case was reopened quietly. The explanation came weeks later through a combination of records and arrests that had nothing to do with the park at first glance. A man had been living in a makeshift shelter less than 2 miles from the spur trail for years. He moved seasonally. He scavenged. He avoided towns. He had a habit of collecting discarded items. Old gear. Boots included. He had found the original missing hiker's boot during the initial search years earlier. He kept it, wore it until it molded to his foot, learned where searchers focused, learned when they stopped looking. He stayed near the trail because it felt safer when people assumed nothing was there. He followed me the day I found the prints, watched me photograph them, saw my name on my uniform and in my notes. He stepped into the clearing that night and stood where he knew I would imagine him standing. He scratched my name because he wanted to be acknowledged, not as missing, as present. The missing hiker was found later that summer, not far from the trailhead, in an area previously searched but missed due to dense undergrowth. He had fallen and died quickly. The man wearing his boots had nothing to do with his death. I requested a transfer after the report was finalized. I work indoors now. I still volunteer for follow-ups, but only the paperwork. Missing persons are not always missing. Sometimes they are watching, waiting for someone to notice them the right way. I took the ranger job because it paid better than fishing and kept me close to home. I grew up on the coast and knew the rain and the trees and the way the ground could turn slick without warning. By 1999, I had already worked boats and docks and logging roads. The park felt safer. It felt predictable. Storms came in from the Pacific, dumped their weight, and moved on. Our work followed patterns. Trails washed out. Creeks swelled. Slopes slumped. We measured, marked, and filed reports. The park was a coastal rainforest in the Pacific Northwest, thick with spruce and hemlock, the understory packed tight with ferns and rotting wood. The The air always smelled wet, even in September when the summer crowds were gone and the days were shorter. That week a storm had come through hard and fast. Warm rain, heavy bands, hours of steady pressure. We were sent out as a group of 3 to check water levels in the backcountry creeks that fed into the main river. The concern was erosion and blowouts. If a channel jumped its banks, it could undermine a trail or a bridge. We hiked in early, packs light, instruments wrapped in plastic. The forest was still dripping. Every step sank a little. The usual sounds were there at first. Birds high up, the low rush of distant water, the soft click of insects in the brush. The first few creeks were loud and angry. Brown water, full of foam and debris, crashing over rocks. We took readings, flagged a culvert that would need attention, and moved on. The last creek on our list was smaller on the map. A thin blue line that cut across a steep section before joining a larger flow. When we got close, I noticed something felt wrong before I could name it. The ground sloped down into a narrow channel with smooth banks. The water was moving fast, but it did not look fast. It slid instead of broke. It was dark, almost black, stained by needles and soil. The surface looked thick, like oil poured over stone. As we stepped closer, the forest sound dropped away. It did not fade. It stopped. No insects. No wind in the canopy. Even the creek made no noise. I remember thinking my ears had plugged. The silence pressed in, heavy and close. My chest felt tight, like I had held my breath without noticing. We stood there longer than we should have. I kept waiting for the sound to come back. I looked upstream and downstream. The water moved without ripples. No white. No splash where it bent around rocks. The channel was smooth and narrow, cut deep into packed soil and bedrock. The banks were slick with algae. There was a faint vibration under my boots, more felt than heard. One of the other rangers shifted his weight near the edge. He was closest to the water. He had been steady all morning, careful with his footing. I watched him stiffen like his balance went wrong. His body went rigid. He leaned forward and took a step that did not match the ground. It was not a stumble. It was not a slip. It was a straight step into the channel. There was no splash. The surface did not break the way water should. It parted and closed. His boots did not kick. His arms did not flail. He did not sink. He disappeared, pulled down and away, like the creek opened and took him whole. The silence held. No cry. No impact. Just absence. I froze where I stood. My hands shook. My mind tried to fill in sound that was not there. The third ranger moved back without looking away, slow and careful, like the ground might give under him too. I remember the smell of wet cedar and my own breath loud in my head. The creek kept sliding past, smooth and dark. We did not rush forward. We did not reach for him. Every part of me knew the water was wrong. The surface was not a surface. It was a moving skin over something that pulled down. I felt a tug in my chest when I leaned even a little toward it, like pressure changing fast. We backed away until the slope leveled. Only then did the forest sound return, not all at once, but piece by piece. A bird call, the faint hiss of wind in the tops. Far off, the rush of another creek. The silence near the channel stayed sharp, like a line drawn across the ground. Search and rescue came later. They brought ropes and poles and divers. The report says he slipped. That is what the paperwork needed. A fall into swift water after heavy rain. Probable drowning. The creek was measured and marked as hazardous. The flow rate was high, but within expected limits for the storm. The water temperature was cold, but not lethal on contact. No body was recovered. What the report does not say is how the creek behaved. The flow was laminar, fast and smooth, pressed into a narrow chute by the storm scouring the banks. The tannins from the forest stained it dark, hiding depth. The channel's shape created a standing wave below the surface, a hydraulic trap that pulled down instead of pushing out. Air was stripped from the water by pressure, killing sound. The vibration I felt was the water moving under tension, sliding over bedrock polished by years of flood. In training, we learn about hydraulics in broad rivers and at dams. We learn about foot entrapment and strainers. We do not learn about silence as a warning. We do not learn that water can move so fast and so smooth that it erases itself, that it can take sound with it. Afterward, the section of creek was removed from public maps. The trail was rerouted upslope. There is no marker, no sign. The forest closed back in. The next winter storms reshaped the channel again. I transferred out the next season. I still live near the coast. I still fish. When I walk near water after heavy rain, I listen. If the sound drops too fast, if the surface looks wrong, I stop. I do not step closer. I do not test it. I turn back. The creek did not need anything unnatural to kill him. It needed rain, shape, speed, and a moment of stillness that took away warning. The silence was not empty. It was the result of forces lined up just right. We never went back, and that was the right call. Some places do not announce their danger. They remove the noise that would save you. I joined the Ranger Service because I wanted quiet work that made sense. I wanted routines, maps, reports, weather checks, and long hours where nothing happened. I had just finished college, and I did not want crowds or phones or noise. I wanted trees, rules, and distance. The northern park where I was assigned was known for winter enforcement. Snowmobile trespass, illegal logging, and the kind of people who thought a boundary sign did not apply to them once the ground froze. My first winter assignment put me on a 2-person patrol focused on tracking illegal snowmobile activity beyond the trail system. It was winter 2006. The snow had settled deep and heavy. The forest stayed quiet in a way that felt sealed. Sound did not carry well. Our days started before light and ended early because the cold punished any delay. My partner had more years than I did. He was methodical, efficient, and kept notes that were cleaner than mine. We worked well together without needing much from each other. That mattered because winter patrols were long and repetitive. The tracks were what caught our attention. We were several miles from any marked trail, deep into a grid square that rarely saw foot traffic. Snowmobile tracks usually cut straight lines. They followed old logging roads or moved with purpose. These did not. They looped in tight circles around the same stand of trees. The pattern repeated. Tight curves, overlapping paths, compressed snow darkened by exhaust residue. No clear direction in or out. We followed them because that was the job. The trees were dense spruce and fir, close enough that light barely reached the ground. The air smelled dry and sharp. The snow under the branches stayed powdery and untouched except where the machine had passed again and again. The circles grew tighter as we moved inward, like something practiced the same motion until the space felt worn thin. In the center was a shelter. It was low and crude, built from branches leaned together and packed with animal hides. The hides were stiff from cold and age, stretched tight with sinew. There was no fire pit, no ash, no burn marks on the snow. The interior was bare. No food wrappers, no tools, no containers. The snow inside was pressed flat, like someone had slept there without shifting much. What stood out was what was missing. There were no footprints leading away, no boot marks, no drag marks. The only disturbance was the snowmobile track circling the trees. The machine never came close to the shelter itself. It orbited it. We circled the site slowly, documenting angles, taking photos, marking coordinates. That was when we noticed the bones. They were arranged along a fallen log a short distance from the shelter. Clean bones. No flesh. No gnaw marks. None cracked for marrow. They were placed with care, sorted by size, lined up parallel to the log as if measured. They were not scattered. They were not buried. They were displayed. My partner stopped writing. He stood still longer than necessary. His posture changed in a way I had not seen before. He had always moved with purpose. Here he did not move at all. We finished the survey because that was procedure. We marked it as a suspected illegal winter camp. We noted the absence of fire use and the unusual track pattern. We listed the bones as animal remains with atypical placement. We left the site the same way we came, following our own tracks back out because the snowmobile path never left the clearing. The hike back felt longer. The light faded fast. The forest stayed still. I kept checking behind us without a clear reason. The cold pressed harder. When we reached the truck, my hands shook as I took off my gloves. I told myself it was the temperature. We filed the report the same day. Photos attached. Coordinates included. Everything clean and factual. The supervisor read it without expression. He asked for clarification on the bones. We explained what we saw. No speculation. Just placement, condition, and proximity to the shelter. The supervisor told us to write it up as animal activity and never return to that grid square. He did not ask for more detail. He did not suggest a follow-up patrol. He did not request wildlife services. He told us the area was unstable terrain in winter and not worth the risk. He closed the file. A week later, my partner quit without notice. His locker was emptied. His boots were gone. His spare gloves were gone. The personal items people forget were not there. It looked planned. No goodbye note. No explanation. His email stopped responding. Human Resources said he resigned effective immediately. I stayed because I needed the job. I told myself it was coincidence. People leave. Winter work breaks some of them. I tried to forget the shelter and the bones and the tracks that never left. I could not forget the way the snowmobile moved. I had grown up around machines. I knew how people rode. Those circles were controlled. Slow. Repeated with intent. They were not joyriding. They were not lost. They were deliberate. Over the next months, I noticed small things. A few old logging roads were quietly reclassified as closed without explanation. A timber survey scheduled for spring was canceled. A proposed thinning project near the grid square was removed from the plan. No announcement. No public notice. Just absence. I pulled the maps on my own time. The area around that grid square was marked with notes going back decades. Environmental concerns. Wildlife corridors. Unstable ground. Historical use unknown. Each note was vague. None explained the restriction fully. Logging plans stopped short of that zone again and again, like a shape avoided without being named. I requested access to older incident reports. The archive was thin. A few mentions of unauthorized camps. A missing snowmobile recovered with no rider found. A winter tracker reassigned suddenly. Nothing conclusive. Nothing dramatic. Just a pattern of people stopping short. Years later, after I transferred to another park, I learned more by accident. A retired supervisor mentioned that the area had been flagged long before I joined. Not for danger to the public, for liability. The Forest Service had been advised not to disturb it, not to log it, not to build through it, not because of what lived there, but because of what happened there when people tried to settle it. In the early logging days, crews worked that section through winter. A temporary camp was established. Machines ran in tight patterns to pack snow for hauling. One season, the crew did not return. Their equipment was found running out of fuel, circling trees near a shelter built from branches and hides. No bodies were recovered. No tracks leaving the site. The official explanation cited weather and wildlife. The land was quietly set aside. The shelter we found matched the description in an internal memo that was never meant for field staff. Low profile. No fire use. Built to hold heat without smoke. Used in winter. The bones were from animals taken cleanly, not processed for survival but for order. The snowmobile pattern was a modern echo of an old habit. Circling to pack snow. Circling to mark territory. Circling to wait. The supervisor had told us to log it as animal activity because that was the only category that closed the case without triggering a review. Returning would have meant disturbing the site. Disturbing the site would have meant questions. Questions would have meant reopening decisions made long before us. My partner did not quit because he was afraid of the forest. He quit because he understood what the silence meant. He understood that some places are managed by avoidance, not enforcement. He saw that the service did not protect us from what we were told to ignore. I never went back. No one ever asked me to. The grid square remains unmarked on public maps. Logging stops at its edge. Trails bend around it without explanation. Snowmobile routes curve wide. I still think about the shelter in winter. About the bones laid out with care. About the tracks that went nowhere. The forest did not feel hostile. It felt organized. Maintained. Like a place that had rules older than any boundary sign. We were told not to log it. We were told without being told. And that was enough to make sure no one ever tried again. My name is Marcus Hale. In June of 2018, I was working as a seasonal ranger at the American Prairie Reserve in Montana, assigned to night inventory because I had a reputation for staying calm and because I did not complain about being alone. The grassland there is wide in a way that changes how sound works. Noise does not echo. It just carries until it disappears. At night the land feels even flatter. You lose depth. Distance becomes a guess. I preferred that to trees. Trees hide things. Night inventory meant slow driving, stopping at fixed points, and using thermal imaging to count animals without pushing them. The reserve was quiet after midnight. No public access. No traffic. Just wind moving grass in waves and the steady presence of bison herds resting or feeding. The job was procedural. Scan. Count shapes. Mark numbers. Move on. I had done it enough times that my hands worked without thought. That night was clear and cold for June. The moon was thin and useless. I was parked on a rise that overlooked a shallow basin where a herd of bison had settled. The truck engine was off. I sat with the window down to avoid fogging the optics. The thermal unit rested on the door frame. Through it the world flattened into color bands. The bison glowed white and pale yellow. The ground sat dark. The sky did not exist. At around 2:40 a.m., I noticed movement at the edge of the herd that did not fit. At first I assumed it was a bison standing, maybe turning, but the shape stayed vertical. Too straight, too narrow. It moved with a cadence that did not match an animal. One step, pause, one step. Upright. The height was wrong. I adjusted the zoom and measured it against nearby bodies. It was close to my height, almost exact. My first thought was another ranger. That was the easiest explanation and the one I wanted. Sometimes staff checked fence lines at night. Sometimes people forgot to log it. I felt annoyed more than scared. Another person out there meant paperwork and questions. I watched, waiting for a flashlight beam or the heat bloom of a radio. Instead, the shape paced along the edge of the herd. As it moved, the bison shifted away from it. Not a panic. No running. Just slow pressure, like water flowing around a rock. That detail bothered me. Bison do not react that way to people they know. Rangers smell wrong to them. Even from a distance they stiffen. This was different. The animals made space without alarm. I zoomed further. The thermal image sharpened. The outline stayed human, but the interior was strange. There was heat at the shoulders and legs, but the center looked dimmer, like a hollow. Not cold exactly, just muted. I checked my settings. I cleaned the lens with my sleeve. The image stayed the same. I felt the first real fear then. Not sharp. Heavy. I stayed still. The shape stopped moving. I realized it had stopped at the same moment I did. I shifted my weight in the seat. The shape took a step. I froze. It froze. I told myself this was coincidence. Thermal lag. Distance distortion. I scanned away, counted another cluster, then returned. The shape was still there. Still upright. Still facing the herd. I changed my posture again, leaning forward. The shape leaned forward. The timing was exact. I backed the zoom out and scanned the surrounding area. No other heat signatures nearby. No vehicle. No second person. That ruled out a normal patrol. Even a poacher would have a partner or a truck staged somewhere. I reminded myself that fear makes patterns where none exist. I focused on details. The ground temperature. The bison count. My breathing. When I looked again, the shape had moved closer to the herd. The animals had shifted farther away. I could see calves now, their smaller heat signatures tucked behind larger bodies. The shape did not approach them directly. It moved sideways, slow and deliberate. That was when I noticed the way it held its arms. Tight to the body. Elbows bent. Not relaxed. As if carrying weight or holding something under a coat. The hollow center made sense then. Insulation. A thermal dampening layer. Something designed to break up a human heat profile. I had heard about it in training. Poachers using layered materials to confuse aerial scans. I had never seen it work this well. Whoever it was knew the technology and knew how we used it. I reached for my radio and stopped. Any sound would travel. The bison were calm but alert. A sudden noise could push them into a run. In the dark, that meant injuries. I also did not know how armed the person was. I stayed in the truck. I watched. The shape turned its head. I could not see facial features, but the heat shifted at the neck. It faced my direction. I had not moved. I had not made noise. There was no reason it should know where I was. The land between us was open. I felt exposed inside the cab, like sitting in a lit room at night. I lowered the thermal unit slowly. The shape did not move. I raised it again. It had taken a step toward me. The distance was still significant, but the intent was clear. This was no longer about the herd. I started the truck. The engine heat bloomed on the thermal screen. The shape stopped. I backed up without turning on the headlights, rolling slow to avoid spooking the animals. The shape matched my movement, maintaining distance. When I stopped, it stopped. When I rolled, it rolled closer. I understood then that the pacing was a test. The person was measuring response. They wanted to know if I would approach or retreat. I chose retreat. I drove back to the main access road and did not look behind me until I reached the gate. I logged the incident at sunrise. Law enforcement followed tracks later that day. They found boot prints with weighted soles designed to mask stride. They found drag marks near the herd where someone had been testing approach angles. They found a thermal dampening poncho made of layered foil and insulation stashed in a culvert. No weapon, no vehicle, no suspect. The official conclusion was attempted poaching. The behavior fit. The equipment fit. The location fit. What stayed with me was the timing. The way the person mirrored my movements without seeing me. The way the bison reacted with quiet compliance. That suggested long observation. Familiarity with both animals and patrol habits. I was reassigned to day shifts after that. I did not argue. Night inventory was suspended in that sector for the rest of the season. The reserve issued updated protocols and better aerial coverage. Nothing like that happened again while I was there. I still think about the hollow shape when I picture thermal screens. About how close technology comes to certainty and how easy it is to step just outside it. What scared me was not the idea of something unreal in the grass. It was the knowledge that someone real had learned how to move among large animals in the dark without being noticed, had learned how to watch me watch them, and had decided to see how far that control extended before disappearing back into the land. My name is Luis Moreno. In October of 2020, I was assigned to wildfire prevention and trail closures in the San Jacinto Mountains, working out of a small ranger station that sat higher than most of the campgrounds and far from the visitor center. My shifts rotated, but I drew nights more often than not. Fewer people wanted them. I did not mind. The work was quiet and methodical. I checked gates, logged wind and humidity, scanned for illegal campfires, and listened to the radio to stay awake. The radio was an old handheld unit issued by the department years before I was hired. It had been refurbished more than once. The casing was scuffed and the screen dim, but it worked. We had a printed list of assigned channels taped inside the locker room door. Fire, law enforcement, maintenance, medical, dispatch, air support. Everything was accounted for. During long stretches of nothing, I would scroll through them out of habit, listening to static, half conversations, and the clipped rhythm of official traffic. It was a way to mark time. That night the wind was low, and the air had that dry cold that only shows up in October at elevation. The moon was bright enough to throw hard shadows across the trailheads. I had finished locking the lower gates and parked near a closed picnic area to fill out logs. The radio sat on the dash. I rolled the channel knob while waiting for my coffee to cool. The channel that came up was not on the list. It was not empty either. At first I thought it was interference bleeding through from somewhere else. The sound was steady and close, like a microphone held too near a mouth. It was breathing, slow, controlled, with a faint rasp on the exhale. No background noise, no wind, no movement, just breath. I waited for a call sign or some kind of identifier. Nothing came. I checked the channel number against the taped list. It was not there. I turned the volume down, then back up, thinking it might fade. It did not. The breathing continued at the same pace. I felt a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with fear at first. It was the wrongness of it. Radios carried voices, not bodies. I scanned past it and then back again. The channel was still there. After maybe a minute, the breathing stopped. There was a pause long enough that I assumed the transmission had ended. Then a voice came through. Calm. Flat. It sounded like someone reading coordinates. Latitude and longitude, spoken clearly and without hurry. The transmission ended as soon as the numbers were finished. I wrote them down in the margin of my log sheet without knowing why. It felt automatic. After my shift ended near dawn, I went home and slept. When I woke later that afternoon, the coordinates stayed with me. I opened a map and entered them. The point landed on a steep drainage north of the park boundary. I zoomed out, then in again, adjusting for any input error. It was exact. I searched incident reports out of idle curiosity. That location matched a ranger death from the early 1980s. A fall during a night patrol. I told myself it was coincidence. Southern California mountains were full of places where people had died doing this job. It meant nothing. The next night I listened again. I did not tell myself I was looking for it, but I scrolled slower. The channel appeared in the same place on the dial. The breathing was there again. Identical. I did not feel surprised. I felt tense, like my body had already accepted it. After a pause, the voice returned. More coordinates. I wrote them down. This time the point marked a turnout along a closed fire road. A ranger had been struck there by a drunk driver in the 1970s. I did not find that immediately. It took longer, which made it worse. I kept searching until I found the match. The precision bothered me more than the pattern. These were not broad areas. They were exact spots. I told myself there was a rational explanation. Legacy equipment. Someone scanning old frequencies for a reason I did not know. Maybe a training exercise that had gone undocumented. Maybe a malfunction replaying archived audio. The breathing made that harder to believe, but stress does strange things to perception. Over the next week it continued. Always during night shifts. Always when I was alone. The channel never appeared during the day. Each time the breathing came first. Each time the coordinates followed. I stopped writing them down after the fifth one, but I checked them anyway. All matched Ranger deaths. Some were recent enough that I remembered the names from safety briefings. Some were older than the park itself. I started sleeping poorly. I replayed the sound in my head. The breathing was not panicked. It was controlled, like someone trying to stay calm while injured. I noticed small details that I wished I had not. The slight catch at the end of each inhale. The way the exhale lingered a fraction longer than normal. It felt intimate in a way radios should not. I tried to catch the channel on a different unit. I borrowed one from the charger rack without logging it out, telling myself it was just to compare. The channel did not appear. I scanned the full range twice. Nothing. When I switched back to my assigned radio, it was there again. I considered reporting it, but hesitated. I had no proof beyond my notes and my word. I did not want to be the night ranger chasing static. The job already came with enough quiet isolation. I convinced myself to wait until I had something concrete. The eighth transmission broke the pattern. The coordinates landed inside the park boundary, near a trail junction I had hiked dozens of times. There was no death listed there. I searched anyway. Nothing. I felt a wave of relief that surprised me. It lasted until I realized what that meant. Either the pattern was broken, or it was incomplete. I drove to the junction before dawn. I did not log the stop. The trail was closed for fire risk, flagged and chained. I stood there with my flashlight off, listening to the wind in the trees. Nothing happened. The spot was ordinary. I went home and slept through the afternoon. When I came in that evening, my radio was missing from its charger slot. A replacement sat there instead. Same model. Same wear. It felt lighter in my hand. I checked the serial number. It was different. I asked the duty log who had swapped it. The entry showed routine maintenance. No details. That night I scanned the channels out of habit. The unlisted channel was gone. I scanned again. Nothing. I felt a mix of relief and something close to loss. The silence felt wrong after weeks of that sound. The next morning my supervisor called me into his office. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He asked why I had been monitoring legacy emergency frequencies during night shifts. I told him I did not know what that meant. That was true. I had never heard the term before. He explained without explaining. Older frequencies had been retired decades ago. Some were never officially documented. Some were tied to defunct systems and outdated protocols. He said people who stumbled onto them sometimes stayed on them too long. He said it like a warning wrapped in a joke. He said he did not know what caused the transmissions. He said nobody did. He said the department quietly replaced radios when it happened. He told me to use the new unit and stick to the assigned channels. I agreed. I did not ask questions. I did not mention the coordinates or the breathing. I did not mention the junction inside the park. I finished out the season without incident. The radio stayed quiet. My sleep improved. The job went back to being what it had always been. Gates, logs, wind, silence. Months later, after the season ended, I read a brief internal notice about a ranger injury. A fall during a night patrol near a trail junction. Non-fatal. Exact location listed in the report. It matched the coordinates I had heard that 8th night. That was when the explanation finally settled into place. The channel had not been predicting deaths. It had been replaying them. A record trapped in a system that no longer had a purpose, cycling through moments of injury tied to exact locations, indifferent to time. The breathing was not someone reaching out. It was the sound recorded at the edge of an incident, carried forward by equipment never meant to last this long. The last transmission had not matched a death because it had not happened yet. It had been an incomplete record, waiting to be finished. When the injury occurred months later, the pattern closed. I did not feel relief when I understood that. I felt a dull acceptance. Systems fail quietly. Data lingers. Radios do not forget on their own. I transferred out of night work the following year. I still work in parks, but my duties are daytime only. When I pass that trail junction, I do not stop. I do not listen. I know better than to scan channels that were never meant to be heard again.